Hello and welcome to Chapter 9.4 of Late-Onset Gender Dysphoria. This is from the book Transgender Ideology and Gender Dysphoria, A Catholic Response. I'm Dr. Thibault. This is a study guide that goes along with the book. If you would like a copy of the book, there's a link below in the description. This isn't going to give you everything in the chapter, but it's a good summary of it, and for anyone who's not going to get the book, it also might be helpful just to get some of this information. So we've just covered gender dysphoria in a general sense in youth, and then early onset gender dysphoria in 2 videos. And now this is late onset gender dysphoria, which is a fairly new concept. So, in terms of self-diagnosis is an issue, right? So this is a part of the late onset gender dysphoria. Dr. Marcus Evans from Tavistock, from the English gender clinic, the one from in England, points out that a lot of the youth that are coming in who are claiming to be transgender, part of it is that they are self-diagnosing. So they're walking in saying, I am gender dysphoric, or I'm transgender. And he says this is already kind of a red flag because, people don't walk in and say, I'm schizophrenic, name the thing. People often have various symptoms, and it takes an expert to diagnose the symptoms and point to a cause. And then usually treatment is varied, right, depending on the symptoms and the severity. In the case of gender dysphoria and transgender, a person walks in and says, I'm transgender and this is the solution. It's kind of a red flag whenever that type of thing happens, right? It says many young people went to Tavistock, experienced complex situations, including broken family life, autism, eating disorders, and other challenges. So when somebody walks in and says, I'm transgender, if you don't do a real deep dive into the issue and you just accept it at face value, and they say, well, what I want is gender sex reassignment surgery and procedures. If you're not looking at the family life, other conditions like autism or eating disorders or other issues, you can come to a wrong, you can come at this wrong. Right? You want to look at the whole story, right? Moral of this story is you don't just take people's word for it, you do a thorough investigation, and doctors should come up with their own conclusions, not just take the word of the patient. Not that you don't investigate this as a possibility, but you don't rush into this, right? This isn't just, you say you're transgender and you're 12 years old, so then we do it. We do surgery, right? This isn't the approach. They've raised ideas that this could be a social contagion. Now, a lot of people from the Toronto school kind of come to this conclusion, right? People like Blanchard or So or Schreier, they all point to this idea that this could be socially constructed rather than something within the brain that's creating a opposite sex function within the brain or something like this. Some of these elements include feelings of dysphoria resulting from puberty in a sexualized culture, right? As soon as a girl starts developing breasts, can be 12, 13 years old, she now becomes a sexualized object within American culture, within a lot of cultures, right? Especially being young, she's even more fetishized than even if she were over 18, right? This is, she becomes an object of lust for the culture, which, when you're only 13, you don't have the mental capacity to handle people 2 or 3, 4 times older than you preying on you, right, mentally or socially. Another thing is the desire to receive attention when they may have felt unseen or unheard unheard. This is another slide, but when you have a family and the parents are on their cell phone day and night and they're watching Netflix and everything's going on and the child's alone in their room on social media all the time, they're not getting a lot of attention, right? They're not getting good quality time, right? You go to a restaurant and you see everybody on the family is on their phone, including the 3-year-old. Soon as you say, I'm transgender, now all of the attention is drawn to you, right? Then you're seeing the specialist, you get therapists, your family has to pay attention to you, right? You become the center of your sphere of influence. And this is, even if they're not aware that they're doing it, it could be a subconscious way of dealing with it, right? Children desire attention. If they don't get the attention, if they don't get the attention by positive behavior, then they act in negative behavior, and then eventually they get the attention of their parents. Overprotective parents who want to prevent their child from experiencing pain, even the natural pain that comes with the angst of puberty. This is another part of it, right? This is also in another slide, but there is both under-parenting and over-parenting within society in the Western culture, right? There's the under-parenting by, being obsessed with social media and the phones and everything else and not listening or experiencing life as a family. People aren't sitting down and having dinner together every night as a family. We're driving through the drive-through or what have you. But then there is also over-parenting that doesn't exist at other times, right? A couple generations ago, you just send the kids out of the house, right? It's summertime. Get out of the house. Go play with your friends. Now it's like, somebody will abduct your child. You can't let the kids out of your sight. There's some level of overprotection as well, right? And feeling, I don't want my kid to experience any pain at all. So once they start going through puberty and they don't like the way they look and they don't like their breasts developing and they don't like this and they're uncomfortable and I don't feel safe, and the parents are swooping in to be the rescuer. But some of this is natural pain, right? All a kid has to do is say, I don't feel safe, and social workers come swooping in. I had a foster son who had a lot of trouble, and he knew he could pull that card. I don't feel safe. Well, what you really mean is I don't feel comfortable, and the reason why you don't feel comfortable is because you're grounded, which is the point, right? Because you failed your test and you didn't do your homework and you're just not doing what you're supposed to do, so you're grounded. So now you're uncomfortable, which is exactly the point. But they know if they say, well, I'm feeling unsafe, all of a sudden the social workers and everybody else kind of swoops in and comes to their aid because, God forbid, a child feels discomfort, right? Or pain, right? And some of this is because there has been so many cases where children have been abused or other things that they are very sensitive to it. However, there's a balance, right? Everything's virtue ethics. Everything's a balance, right? It's never all of one or all of the other. Lastly, nominalist gender theorists are rewriting the narrative of intersex and transgender people to eliminate any biological realism or sexual morality. They use cultural guilt in society being homophobic to justify their gender relativism. Right? I think a lot of what we're dealing with now is because society has not been overly religious for a while, but they continue to withhold rights for gay and lesbian people, and now they've gotten over that very quickly, and now they have applied that to nearly everyone, right? Anything that deals with sex is now automatically approved. Even things of saying, well, we're polyamorous and raising children and these. There's just a tolerance for these types of abnormalities that didn't exist before. I think part of it is the idea that if you don't judge my failures, then I don't judge your failures, right? So, when so many married people have been divorced or they've cheated and they've done all of these things, and they're not living a good moral life themselves in terms of sexual ethics, the attitude is, well, don't judge me and I won't judge you, right? Not that they're in favor of everything, but they don't want to go down the road of being moral dictators, right? Because if somebody turns the lens back around on them, they wouldn't do very well, right? So these are all elements of it perhaps being somewhat of a social contagion, not just something in the brain. Already kind of talked about this last slide, but that we're dealing in a time of both overparenting and underparenting. I think we can see examples of that. Right. Next is ROGD, which is Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria. This is a case brought up by Lisa Littman of Brown University, Dr. Lisa Littman, where she points out, this is in 2018, kind of defines these people with rapid onset gender dysphoria: those who suddenly start to manifest symptoms of gender dysphoria and self-identifying as transgender simultaneously with other children in their peer group. So these are children who have shown no signs of gender dysphoria until their teenage years. And now when other children are identifying as transgender, they have jumped on this bandwagon. And Lisa Littman's study has come from a collection of parent narratives. This isn't coming from children, but from the parents who say, this is what I'm experiencing with my kids. And she's interviewed them on this. She points out that there really wasn't this group in existence before a few years ago, right? In the late 2010s, children all of a sudden coming out at 15 years old and saying, I'm transgender, right? Before this, we had early onset gender dysphoria would have been the typical scenario, right? This is the last two videos, if you want to go back to it. But these are people around 2 to 4 years old. When they start expressing themselves, they're showing themselves more typical of the opposite gender, right? This would be what Blanchard would call androphilic, more homosexual type transgender. This would have been the early onset gender dysphoria. And parents could tell there's something unusual with my kid, right? And sometimes the kids grow up, 80, 90%, 60%, whatever. It's a high percentage, though, of early onset gender dysphoria. They just outgrow. But parents could see at an early age there's something unusual about my child. Maybe they're homosexual, maybe they're transgender, maybe they're a bit odd, but they're gender non-conforming, and they're doing it at 2 or 3 years old when they're not reading about this online. They're 3 years old. So there's something unusual, right? So there's a recognition by society, by the family, for early onset gender dysphoria that something's unusual, although many times they grow out of it. These are kids that grew up perfectly consistent with their biological gender, and all of a sudden now at 15 years old they're saying, I'm transgender. And what some parents are pointing out is like, well, at 14 years old, you loved going to the beach in your bikini. We couldn't get you out of your bikini all summer long when you were 14, and now in the summer of 15, you have this idea that I'm not comfortable in my body, and I'm really a boy, and my breast and my body makes me dysphoric. It's like, well, last year it didn't. Last year you have no problem with this. These low, high cut, short jeans. How teenage girls wear their shorts so high they're practically wearing a bathing suit when they go to school or they go to church. Right? It's showing so much of their leg, and then all of a sudden, I'm not comfortable with my body. Well, you seem like you like showing it off quite a bit until all of a sudden now it's different, right? This is very different than early onset gender dysphoria. And again, I keep bringing up this bill in California from this one's 2020, right? 2020 healthcare bill, which pointed out that 27% of youth between the ages of 12 and 17 are gender nonconforming, and they put this in a transgender health bill, kind of making the connection that gender nonconforming and transgender, there's a very close connection between these things. So you're talking about in the state of California, 796,000 children they're presuming are some degree of gender nonconforming transgender, which this is kind of a crazy idea, right? There's nearly 800,000 transgender children in the state of California. That 27% of the children in California are transgender, which presumably they'll grow into adults, which means 27% of the population is transgender. This doesn't mean anything anymore, right? It doesn't stand for anything. It's not possible, if I were to say 27% of society is intersex. 50% of society is male or female, so 27%, you almost have an entirely new sex. If this were true, right? It's 27%, such a high percentage. Clearly, it doesn't make any sense. So, if we look at these trends that of late onset gender dysphoria, or rapid onset gender dysphoria as well, right? Kind of similar. When we look at referrals, the highest age of referrals for being transgender among youth is between the ages of 13 and 16, right? Highest, well, not just among youth, the highest rates of people identifying as transgender who are going to clinics to seek assistance for being transgender are between 13 and 16. It's not 40-year-olds, not 50-year-olds, not 30-year-olds, not 20-something-year-olds. 13 to 16 is the age in which people are most seeking help for being transgender. 77.6% of all transgender youth referrals are that, but it's also one of the largest percentage of people in general is the 13 to 16. As you can see from this chart here, after the age of 15 is the peak, 16 is still quite high. After 16 years old, referrals kind of drop right off. There's almost as many people seeking treatment at 17 as there was at 11 years old, which is not as many. Right? There's an 81% drop-off referral between the ages of 16 and 17. So between the ages of 16 and 17, 81% of transgender referrals are just gone, right? So a lot of people are referred to the gender clinics between 13 and 16, but if you just, presumably, I know it might be a bold presumption, if you just wait, it might go away, right? It's possible that it will desist, right? When last time we looked at these desisting rates, it's like 63%, 80%, 84%, 90%, 94%, right? All these different studies, and there's this attitude of, no, this is not true, this is not true, right? Well, look at the actual referral rates, 2019, right? It drops off, right? And right? And we look to England and the Tavistock, same thing, right? The same thing. It seems to be true internationally, right? The numbers go up in teenage years and drop off. With Dr. Littman's study on this, of these teenagers, again, from the parents' perspective, she used 256 parents who talked about their children's behavior. Of the children who identified as transgender, 82.8% were female, natal female, so there's much more higher prevalence among females, considerably. The average age of people coming out as transgender, or when the parents were discussing this, was 16.4, so it's towards the end of this spectrum. 85.9% of the parents claimed that they were favorable to same-sex marriage, and only 3.1% of the parents said that they did not believe in equal rights and protections for transgender people. So this is a highly debatable thing within Dr. Littman's study. So the activists against Dr. Littman say she has selected a conservative, anti-transgender audience. And you look at where Dr. Littman found these people for the study, they were mostly from websites, forums, that were parents talking about, there's something wrong, I don't think my kid's transgender, and what is going on, right? What is the ideology? What did my kid get involved in, right? These are parents talking to other parents. So this is not it's not a random selection of all transgender parents. These are concerned parents of transgender youth, right? So there is already a bias of parents being skeptical. Now, from the parents who are skeptical, it doesn't seem like the parents whose kids are identifying as trans are conservative, right? These are just parents, and then all of a sudden the kids come out as transgender. Now, they're not parents who are ready to jump on the pride parade with their kid, so they might lean more conservative. But if we can take the numbers seriously, that 86% are in favor of same-sex marriage and only 3.1% are against transgender rights, it's not so heavily biased that you can't take what they're saying as truthful, right? I think that's fair enough. Those who were against Dr. Littman's study, as soon as it was released at Brown University, which is not known as a conservative university, people were so outraged by her study that they had it silenced, canceled, right? It was taken down from the PLOS ONE website. The press release was removed from Brown University's webpage. This has already been peer-reviewed, but it was taken down again. They did some review again. Basically, nothing changed other than the title of the article, where it specified that this was a parent survey. And then it was put right back out there again, right? But quite a few months later. The politics, right? There's the politics. If I don't like what your scientific study has come to a conclusion with, right? If I don't like your conclusion, then your study is biased, right? The only valid studies are the ones that agree with what I already believe to be true, right? So transgender activists are the most, or gender theorists are the most active in this area. So if anything comes out that does not speak to their narrative about gender theory, they will descend upon the organization and try to get it canceled, removed, destroyed, silenced. There's nobody really on the other side to support you, right? This leads to a silencing of science, right? And this was pointed out earlier back in, I think, chapter 3 with cancel culture stuff. So if you're interested in that, go back to chapter 3. In Dr. Littman's study, only 2.4% of parents thought that their children were correct in the assessment that they were transgender. right? So of the 256 parents, most did not believe that their children were transgender. This again is very different than other things like early onset gender dysphoria or homosexuality or other things, right? If a child comes out as homosexual, often the parents were quite aware that something was different with their child before the child has even come out, usually, right? A child comes out, I'm gay. Parents go, I kind of already knew that for a while, right? There's some controversy over the saying things like this, but in general, parents know their kids better than the kids know themselves, right? Early onset gender dysphoria, where the boy has been wearing his mother's clothes for as long as he's been around, they were aware that something was unusual, right? In this case, almost all the parents say, my daughter is not a boy, right? And I don't think that this is going to stick. I don't think this is really who she is. I think she's going through a phase. I think that she's influenced by her friends. I think, she's uncomfortable with her body, right? They have found many things that they think that might be the cause, but the idea that they are truly transgender is very rare. Okay. But what's the problem with some of this, right? What's the problem? Well, people like Blair White, who's transgender and a bit conservative or moderate, however you want to put it, she claims that she's transgender, but she has a YouTube channel. She claims that thousands of detransitioners, people who've transitioned then detransitioned back, have reached out to her and claimed that they went down an online rabbit hole. They said, she's quoting Blair White, they just got way too deep into the trans online communities. And this is true for a lot of people with autism who kind of internalize these things and can't put it all into perspective. But this is true in general of teenagers, right? Teenagers become obsessed with anime or this or the other thing, right? It's what teenagers do, right? When I was young, teenagers became obsessed with things like goths, and they were wearing all black and did their faces white and hang out at the mall, and then they grew up, right? Now they don't do that anymore, right? But that was their rebellion and their identity when they were teenagers, and now they grew up and that's not an issue anymore. So some of the other things to consider from Dr. Littman's study was 41%, again, that's the parents who are reporting this, 41% of their children who claim to be now transgender first claimed to be non-heterosexual first, right? Either bisexual or homosexual. So that's a pretty high percentage. 62.5% were diagnosed with at least one mental health disorder or neurodevelopmental disability prior to coming out, right? So autism or something like this, 62%. So this is not a monosymptomatic issue, right? This is not, I'm perfectly mentally healthy except I'm transgender, right? There often seems to be some other connection as well, right? And if we look back to chapter 7 and 8, maybe it's a sign that there's a common etiology, right? A common cause that caused both the neurodevelopmental disorder and transgender, right? Maybe, right? That would be one argument. The other one is that people have very complicated psychological makeups, and there's a lot of underlying issues, and if you dealt with all the underlying issues, then the gender dysphoria might resolve itself as well, right? So that's another argument. So you have kind of both. If you were to kind of break from this, if you were to be prudent with this, though, you would first start with treating any of the other psychological disorders, any of the other trauma. The person's anxious, depressed, all these, deal with all of these things, right? Deal with the things that you know how to cure first, right? We know how to cure some of these things, right? an antidepressant, an anti-anxiety pill, right? See a therapist, talk about these issues. Those trauma, deal with the trauma. Deal with this first, and then see if any of this resolves itself in terms of the gender issue, right? That would be the most prudent thing to do, right? You don't start with, well, you got all these other issues, so let's start with the gender issue first. Well, some of this might have caused the gender issue, so that would be the most prudent way of dealing with that, especially among youth, right? 36.8% claimed that the majority of their friend group also identified as trans. Now, some opponents of this study point out, well, when you come out as LGBT, you often look for other people within that category to associate with so that you build a peer group of some kind. So just because a person has trans friends, that might be that they are looking for the support of a trans community, which would make some sense. It also means, if these are all people they go to school with or people that they are associating with, there can also be some sense of peer pressure, right? Or, my friends are trans, so I'm trans. Or even if it's an online group, right? If I feel unsupported and abandoned and I don't really fit in, and I go into an online trans support group, and now all of a sudden I have a community. The real goal was to find acceptance and community. They found it in a trans group, so now they're trans, right? So this is the other side of this. Probably, maybe a little of both, right? To say it's not that at all wouldn't make any sense either. 47.2% found a mental health decline after coming out, which is an important thing, because usually, like if somebody comes out as gay or lesbian, usually there's an increase in mental health because this was a very heavy thing that was weighing on them, and the coming out process took some of the heaviness off, right? Usually. But in this case, coming out actually is the beginning of your decline, right? So if this were normal and healthy, and it wouldn't lead to worst outcome, right? More isolation, more distancing, right? And 86.7% of parents reported a substantial increase in social media and internet use, and or starting to hang out with friend groups where multiple people identified as trans, right? So it became a bit of an obsession, right? It's not I'm come out and now I can just live my life integrated in society as, if I'm girl, I'm a boy. Okay, now I'm just living as a healthy boy, and I integrate into boy life, boy culture, boy activities, and everything. And now I'm happy as a boy, and I'm successful as a boy, and I don't have the stress and anxiety and depression. That's not what happens. So it's like I come out as a boy, right? Since most of them are girl, come out as a boy, and now I only hang out with trans people. And I just spend my time talking in trans groups, and I'm more depressed, more suicidal, and I don't associate with the outside world, right? With general society or with natal boys, right? I don't hang out with boys. Well, what was the point, right? This is not a sign of good mental health, right? This is a sign of something that's somewhat difficult. Dr. Littman points out this. Dr. So also points this out, the suicide threat. Now, this is the thing that ends up becoming very interesting. So many times parents acquiesce to their child's desire to transition, growth hormone, hormone blockers, changing names, all these things. They acquiesce to it because of fear that if they do not, their child will get depressed and commit suicide, Right? This is a concern of trans and suicide, and if you call me by my birth name, I'm going to commit suicide, right? These types of things. If I don't get hormone blockers, I'm going to commit suicide, right? These types of talks, and there's fear of suicide and self-harm. But on the other hand, a lot of the discussion groups and the community groups for transgender youth tell the youth, how to, basically giving them a script of how to talk to your parents to get hormone blockers, how to talk to your therapist to get put on the pathway for transitioning, right? This is the stuff that you need to say in order to move it forward, right? It's not tell your parents or tell your therapist how you actually feel so that they can come to a proper diagnosis. Say X, Y, Z, and then they will have to do this, right? Then they'll do it, right? So some of these coaching things say, tell them that if you don't get the treatment, you're going to commit suicide, right? It forces them to do it. They'll have to give it to you, right? This is manipulation, right? Dr. So points out, this is how unknowing parents who only want to make life easier for their son or daughter have become prime targets of a campaign that has weaponized science and medicine and taken vulnerable children as prisoners. A related form of emotional blackmail involves constantly referencing the suicide statistic, right? This is transgender or gender ideology activists are constantly going to use the suicide rate numbers, self-harm numbers to say, you have to do this, and if you don't do what your kid asks, their death is on you. Their harm is on you, right? You are responsible for killing your child, and they are a ticking time bomb, and you are responsible. It is child abuse, right? It's child abuse to not do what your child has asked for in terms of gender, right? This is manipulation, right? It's manipulation. And the suicide number is concerning, right? It is concerning. We get to that in the next chapter. However, we've also noted that the suicide rates don't go down after the treatments. Suicide rates are still very high after transitioning. And if you have transitioned because you're thinking this is your only hope, this is the thing that will finally make you feel normal, and you go through all the way and you transition and you still feel miserable like you did before, but now you have to detransition, you're more likely to commit suicide than you were before. Because before, at least you had hope. Now, after you've gone this way and it didn't provide you with what you thought you were going to get, now you don't even have hope, right? Now your only option is to tell everyone you were wrong, go through the whole legal process, the whole medical process. You don't have a supportive community like you did when you were transitioning, right? You have all these transgender support groups. There's no detransitioning support groups. You have Starbucks and all these other corporate entities celebrating transgender. You don't have anyone celebrating going back to what you were before. And a lot of your friends and your people who you associated with before are going to turn their back on you. So that's not going to lead to suicide. Suicide is complicated, but saying go down the road of transitioning is going to remove the suicide threat. This is not what the statistics show. This isn't how it works, right? There's other groups like these websites. Am I Transgender? Transgender.net. Right, you go on to the thing. Am I Transgender? Right, transgender activist sites, and this one said, as soon as you go on to the site, Am I Transgender? It says yes. If you go on IamTransgender.net, the answer is, am I transgender? Yes. well, I went onto the site and I'm not transgender, so that's the answer is not always yes, right? So the assumption is if you are asking the question, am I transgender? You are transgender, right? Just by asking the question, right? Just by being curious, am I transgender? Okay, yeah, if you are asking the question, then the answer is yes. Well, that is terrible listening, right? It's not very good diagnosis. A teenager goes, I wonder if, maybe I'm transgender. Let me go to find out. Yes, you are. If you're asking the question, you are transgender. Some of the links on the sites points to different articles and things. One of them was, a human being does not possess any inherent identity or value and must create these things for themselves. Right? These are some of the answers that you're giving to teenagers. Well, what is this? This is John Locke, right? We dealt with this in chapter 2 when it comes to ideology, right? This is the non-ascriptivist ideology that to be a female, the only thing females have in common is all females call themselves females, right? That's the only thing. There's nothing inherent or true about any type of categorization, right? This is just Enlightenment nonsense. Another link, there's a handful of links on this, and that's the only thing on the website other than yes. Then there's a few links. 8 signs and symptoms of indirect gender dysphoria, written by Zinnia Jones, right? So these are 8 signs for youth to figure out, am I transgender? Number 1, continual difficulty with simply getting through the day. I didn't know that meant you were transgender, right? 2, a sense of misalignment, disconnect, or estrangement from your own emotions. Again, I don't see how that has anything to do with transgender. A feeling of just going through the motions in everyday life as if you're always reading from a script. Okay? A seeming pointlessness to your life and no sense of any real meaning or ultimate purpose. Knowing you're somehow different from everyone else and wishing you could be normal like them. A notable escalation in the severity of emotions of the symptoms during puberty. Attempting to fix your own thoughts, attempting to fix this on your own thoughts, various coping mechanisms. And lastly, substantial resolution of these symptoms is a very obvious way upon transitioning, particularly upon initiating hormone treatment, right? So basically what Zinnia Jones has described is primarily puberty. She has described puberty, and she's also described the human condition, particularly from a non-Catholic sacramental worldview, right? The pointlessness and emptiness of life. Okay, the myth of Sisyphus, right? We're dealing with Camus, we're dealing with Sartre, right? We're dealing with Locke. These people are clearly coming out of the modernist philosophical perspective of nihilism, right? It's just an acceptance of nihilism. It's like, well, if you're feeling nihilism, you must be transgender. The Catholic Church must be able to offer a better narrative than this, because this is nonsense, right? This is just a bunch of garbage. The promise, right? Zinnia Jones tweeted out, I remember when I saw this on my phone, transitioning won't solve all of your problems. It can only treat or improve gender dysphoria, as well as associated depression, anxiety, disassociation, stress, poor body image, eating disorders, sexual dysfunction, social difficulties, substance abuse, self-harm, suicidality. Oh, is that what transitioning will solve for you? Right? Only all of your problems. Right? Why don't you put in there economics too, right? And you'll be rich. And right? These promises, right? It's claiming every problem you have is gender dysphoria. Transitioning will solve all of your problems. Right? This is the promise. Now, any adult should be able to read this and say, "What a bunch of nonsense!" Right? This is nonsense. This is not the cause of your problems, and this is not the solution to your problems. When you're 14, 15 years old, this is not. They don't have the prudence or wisdom to really understand this, right? They don't know. They might believe it, right? Especially if this is what their friends are reading and this is what their friends are doing. It's also why you can't listen to a child that says 14 years old after they go on these sites and they read these things, and it's disseminated in Twitter and Reddit and Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and everything else, right? It's not limited to one venue. This is disseminating into the culture in all places. We should be very skeptical when a child, after being exposed to all this, says, "I'm transgender." The question is, what do you mean, right? It's to ask further questions, right? Because if they start repeating some of this stuff that they read, right, they start saying some of this nonsense, you should be able to very quickly say, well, this isn't true, right? You feel a disconnect in life. Well, welcome to being human, right? Right? This isn't transgender, it's being a human being, right? Another issue that we have with the youth is this overwhelming problem of dysmorphia. There's an overwhelming amount of dysmorphia in the culture. Snapchat dysmorphia is one part of it. You could call it Instagram dysmorphia, TikTok dysmorphia, and everything else. So this idea is that the youth in particular use so many filters that they are unable to identify what they actually look like anymore, right? If you were to go on TikTok, I just downloaded that today to try to figure out what's going on with it. Automatically, if you turn on TikTok and try to make a video, there's automatically a filter that removes any blemishes and wrinkles and anything else, right? It's automatic, built into the program. If this is, an Instagram and Snapchat, likewise, all dealing with filters. If this is how you see yourself and you put yourself out there, then you get all these likes. Oh, you're so beautiful, you're this, that, the. And then you look in the mirror, you don't look like your TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, all these things where people are calling you beautiful. You don't look like that. You go, well, there's something wrong with me. I need plastic surgery or something. Number of people are going into plastic surgeons with pictures from their social media saying, I want to look like this. They want to look like a filtered version of themselves. This is unhealthy. This is a red flag, right? This is not normal, right? This is dysmorphia, right? When you think that what you really look like is the filtered version of yourself and your actual self is the fake self, right? This is a psychological issue that needs to be addressed, right? But the youth deal with this, but also older people deal with it too. And I'm in a number of transgender groups online, and I kind of keep quiet because I try to say something nice or I keep quiet, right? I'm not there to criticize or to do any problems but I just try to get a sense of where things are going and what, keep my finger on the pulse. And there's a number of older people, usually men wanting to be women, and 50, 60 years old, this person will never look like a woman after all these years of treatment. And usually these are autogynephilic individuals. If you don't know what that means, go back to chapter 6. And there's typically nothing feminine about them naturally. There's nothing naturally feminine about them. And a number of people, they put these pictures up of themselves as women, but with all these filters and things, so that a 60-year-old male dressed as a woman is putting up pictures of themselves as if they were 20 years old, how they would look with all the filters and program. They have these programs on there of like turning back time, or if you're young, you could move forward how you'll look when you're 80, all these programs. And it's like, after I'm done with my transitioning and surgeries, I want to look like this. And they're showing themselves as some 25-year-old, no wrinkles, beautiful skin, perfect everything. And then you see what they look like in real life. It's like, you will never look 25. It's just, there's nothing out there on the market that will make a 60-something-year-old look like a 20-something-year-old. Ask Cher, ask Madonna, right? You can turn back time with a little bit of money, but you cannot convincingly look like a 25-year-old woman when you are a 60-something-year-old biological male. Right? Not going to happen, especially as a white man. Maybe, Asian cultures and things, there can be this. The lady boys can naturally, without any hormones, can pass as women sometimes, but 60-something-year-old white man will not look like a 25-year-old woman. Even with millions of dollars, you won't. So how much of this is dysmorphia, right? This idea that this is how I want to be, and when I finally get this, I'll be happy. Like, if this is what it's going to take to be happy, you'll never be happy, right? You have to learn to compromise. There's more issues of social contagion. Some of this is from Dr. Littman's study. She gave the story of a 14-year-old natal female. Three of her other females were on a tennis team, and the tennis coach comes out as transgender. Very popular coach. She comes out as transgender, saying, I'm a boy. And then all four friends on this team, who were born female, all identify as transgender, right? So now the coach is transgender, and four of the females on the team are now transgender. So 5 of them are now transgender. And the parents are saying, transgender might exist, but the chances that there were 4 transgender kids on the same tennis team that the coach came out as transgender in high school, there's only 20-something kids on the team, and four of the females on the team all come out as transgender. Tell me this is not a social contagion. Tell me it just happened to be 0.06% of the population is transgender, and somehow 4 of the 0.06% of the whole population all ended up on the same tennis team with the coach who's also transgender. Not likely, right? This is not likely. Dr. So reported about 40% of adolescents, more than half of their friend groups, had also come out as transgender. This is more than 70 times the prevalence of transgender adults in the general population, right? So when members of their peer group are coming out as transgender, 40% of adolescents, more than half of their friend groups had also come out as transgender. Again, social contagion, right? This is the chances that this would be true, given that the odds would be that this is 70 times more prevalent than the general population, is just a sign it's a social contagion for teenagers. The story of Grace Lindinsky, she was 22 years old. She was interviewed by Leslie Stahl in this 60 Minutes interview. She says, when I saw them being so happy, she's talking about people online who identify as transgender, and excited about the wonderful transformation process to become their true selves, I asked myself, have I considered that this could be my situation too? I was thinking it would make me free. Within 4 months, Grace had received a double mastectomy, and 1 year later, and within 1 year, she wasn't even transgender for 1 year, she already had started detransitioning. So at 22 years old, she could sign off and say, I consent to this. She's an adult, she's 22. But within seeing these things online and kind of getting sucked down a rabbit hole, within 4 months, she had already had her breast removed, and hormone treatment and all of this, and within 1 year she was already reversing it, right? You can't go through gastric bypass surgery that quickly, but that you can make life-altering changes to your body, right? This is not a successful case. The Kiara Bell case is a very famous one from England, right? At the Tavistock. This was a 2020 case, not that long ago. At 16, Kiara was a natural tomboy. She was enticed by online forums about transitioning. After 3 one-hour appointments, doctors put Kiara on hormone blockers. So she had 3 appointments for 1 hour, and she was on hormone blockers. She now claims she should have been challenged on the proposals or the claims that I was making for myself, she said. And I think it would have made a big difference as well if I was just challenged on things I was saying, right? So, and now she's like 23 or something like that. So, so she was on hormone blockers and then reverse sex hormones. She was on testosterone for several years, right? So now she has a permanent masculine voice and things like this. It's like she said, I just needed some pushback. I need somebody to ask me what I was really feeling, really thinking, and doing a proper analysis of this. So the High Court also found, the High Court, she sued Tavistock saying, you're not following the WPATH protocols, right? You didn't, 3 hours is not enough hours of counseling before doing a major transition like this. You've really violated your duty of care, right? That's what she sued over. The High Court, this is in England, found that the use of hormone blockers provided no overall improvement in mood or psychological well-being using standardized psychological measures, right? Saying what the British healthcare system is doing is not helping teenagers, right? It's not helping, and what they did was negligent and abuse towards Kiara Bell, right? It's interesting to see how this might affect transgender transitioning afterwards, after this case. We've been in the pandemic, so I think this has slowed down a lot of medical treatments. Okay, more stories. This will be the last one, and then I think I'll turn this into a second video for the part 2 because it's gotten so long. Charlie Evans was a female who became male, who went back to female in her young 20s when she did this. She now runs the Detransition Advocacy Network in the UK. She is not anti-transgender, and she says it's awfully hard because everybody assumes she's anti-transgender, and she's not trying to be anti-transgender, but she is saying a lot of people are making the wrong decision, right? They've gone down a rabbit hole and they're on the wrong path. What she points out is 5 common things which seem to exist among many members of her network of detransition people. So people who have regretted their transitioning and gone back to their natal sex. So they are overwhelmingly female. A lot of females are going down the road incorrectly. She said most were lesbian or bisexual. Right? So there have been many who have made this claim that the trans movement is emptying out the lesbian bars. Right? So many lesbians are becoming boys that they have disseminated, they have destroyed the lesbian community. This is one claim by lesbian feminist activists who are somewhat against the transgender movement. Third, many were autistic. Oh, this should have been another one. Fourth, most were under 25 years of age. And lastly, most of them had comorbidities with eating disorders, anxiety, or depression, right? So most were homosexual females with autism who were young and had other underlying psychological conditions. Right? This is the commonality among those who are detransitioning. So again, trying to take a middle balanced approach to any of this, right? Balanced approach. If somebody were to say, let's say you're an authority, you're a parent, you're a teacher, you're a therapist, you're a social worker, whatever it be. If you find a young female who is a tomboy, typically lesbian, who's identified as lesbian, they're autistic and they have other psychological disorders that they're dealing with, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, you should be extraordinarily slow with even considering transitioning them because they are at a very high risk group for having misdiagnosed their condition, right? It's not saying that they could not be transgender, but they have very likely commonalities. They have very high commonalities with other people who have incorrectly diagnosed this disorder and have transitioned unsuccessfully and now are detransitioning. This should be a lesson, right? This would be a lesson. You have to recognize trends, right? This makes sense. In a BBC interview, she claimed young lesbians are being misdiagnosed with gender dysphoria and put on medical pathways when they are gay. When asked what would help those young people, she answered, they need longer therapy periods and help with other mental health issues. Right? This is an underlying issue. I understand I'm speaking to a Catholic audience mostly, and perhaps more conservative Catholic audience. So talking about, well, the person is gay, I know that's a whole nother can of worms. You know, is anyone being gay, or is it a matter of attractions and choice and all of this? I know this is a complicated issue, and I don't want to remove any of the ethical or moral dimensions to this. But I'm presenting to you these arguments, and these are the arguments, and I think they're useful to know what the arguments are, right? And I'm not trying to give an ideal situation. I'm trying to give what people are saying, and this is what Charlie Evans is saying, and I think there might be some truth in it, right? I tend to think that there is homosexual attraction which exists, and this could be this could come out in various ways, right? There are healthy ways of dealing with attractions, and there are unhealthy ways with dealing with attractions, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual, right? There are good ways to deal with things and bad ways of dealing with things, and to get a sex change might be one of the worst ways of dealing with same-sex attraction, right? This is the least natural response. Lastly, just because it ties in from the same 60-minute story, is part of something from psychotherapist James Caspian. Now, I try to point out if a person is a really great scientist or not. James Caspian, I think, in my opinion, is a bit mixed, right? He's a bit, I wouldn't put all my eggs in the James Caspian basket, although he was on 60 Minutes and BBC, and there's something. He was on the BBC, not the 60 Minutes episode. But there are other things he's gone down that I wouldn't fully jump on board with 100%, I don't think. But some of this ties in a lot with what Charlie had just written about, just spoken about. First, he found with ministering or treating transgender people for the last decade, he says, first, he found the popularity of transgender activists on social media consumed the questioning teen, right? So usually the teenager has been kind of consumed with the activism and the ideology online, right? They've kind of been drawn into it. Second, he found that females wanting to escape the pressures and expectations of being female, or even trying to undo trauma of past sexual abuse experiences as a woman. This, again, seems fairly likely to have some truth to it, right? Not for everybody, but there is some likelihood that there was some trauma or something, right? Since we start sexualizing girls at 13 years old with the pornography culture and everything else, this seems not unthinkable that girls would want to be escaping from that type of objectification. So that's it for this one. We will do a part 2 next, because I've already gone over 1 hour here, and I'm only part of the way done through the slides. Okay, see you next time.